Just to start very briefly, I'll introduce myself. Like she said, my name is Stephanie Porto. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, we good? Okay. I am the programs analyst for Whole Kids Foundation. I'm also a registered dietitian. Has anyone in here, I'm guessing based on what Kiara said, that some of you have heard of Whole Kids Foundation? Yes? Has anyone been a grant recipient in the past? No, okay, that's good too. Yeah, so I'm going to share a little bit of information about our organization and then about our garden grant application and about how to make the application the best it can be, but then definitely check out our website if you guys have any questions about the other work we do. So in our time together, more specifically, the key components that we feel come together to create a successful garden program. We'll talk very briefly about building partnerships because we talk about having extended community support as being an element of sustainability for your garden. And then we'll talk about some tips on how to make your grant application the strongest when you sit down to write it. And this is not just specific to our grant application. These tips can be used for any grant application that you might write. So Whole Kids Foundation is a foundation of Whole Foods Market. Our mission is to improve children's nutrition by supporting schools and organizations and inspiring families. So for the purpose of today's presentation, I'll share just a bit about the way that we support schools and organizations and be more specifically talking about our garden grant program and the grant application. But I also have, and I'm going to put at the back of the room so that you guys have a quick, this card right here just gives a very brief overview of what we call our foundational program. So in addition to our garden grant program, we have a handful of others. Our primary ways that we support schools and organizations are through our salad bar grant program, our school food support program, our garden grant program, our bee grant program, and then our healthy teachers and healthy food service staff program. So Whole Kids Foundation awards 600 garden grants each year. We typically get between 900 and 1,000 applications. We've developed the program to, really it's intended to support applicants as they start or maintain their garden programs. So as I'm sure everyone in this room can agree, it's an accepted fact that before a kid is going to be comfortable with eating all of the veggies on their plate, it really helps if they're comfortable with it, if they have a relationship with it, if they've been exposed to it, if they've maybe tried it or learned where it comes from. That is why we believe in gardening with kids in schools. We love to support schools and organizations that are, working to make this connection between kids and their food, excuse me. Our garden grant program is a $2,000 monetary grant to support either a new or existing edible educational garden in the K through 12 grade range. Like many of our programs, we run the garden grant program in partnership with other organizations. So for our garden grant program, we work with Food Corps. Food Corps is a program of AmeriCorps, and they place service members into schools to help make the connection between kids and their food and teach them about these things. So they review all of our applications for us. They serve as our subject matter experts. Our application process is a fall application, spring selection. We have a 6-week grant application window that starts on September 1st and closes on October 15th every year. We have the Food Corps members review the applications, and from there we select them. From that 900 to 1,000 applications, we select 600 of those applications each year. And in the past, so this is kind of exciting, in the past it was a 1-year grant, non-renewal, so that meant if you received a garden grant from Whole Kids Foundation, you were not eligible to apply for another one, but we're changing that. So in the future, even if you've received a garden grant from Whole Kids Foundation, we will have a program that makes you eligible to apply for additional funds, which is really exciting because now we can come back to some of the people that we've worked with and supported. So generally what we look for when we are selecting our garden grant recipients, first and foremost is the kid or student involvement in the garden. So we like to see that the garden involves the students in every aspect of the gardening, from the planning and the building to the planting and the growing, the maintaining and the harvesting. Any garden that's really working to make the connection between the student and their food really speaks to us. Second, an integration into academics and school or the overall community. So for us, that often looks like, how many of the students get to come to the garden? How often do they get to come to the garden? How many of the subjects get to use the garden as a teaching tool? And then in terms of, we do support nonprofit organizations, so if that doesn't apply, if it's not a school, then how are they integrating the garden into the community and really engaging the kids that come through their organization as members of that community. Third, leadership support. So we do make it a priority to have leadership support, or we want everyone to make it a priority to have leadership support for their garden. If you don't have the support of your principal, or your admin, your executive director at the organization that you work at, we find that it can be much more difficult to get your program up and then to keep it running. And then sustainability. So sustainability could mean a lot of things. That's sustainability in the way of funds or support or community involvement. And so looking at all of those things is another big piece. So our application was written and the program is developed really to be a guide for someone when they're developing their school garden. So we've identified, and they're reviewed in this way as well. So there are 6 key components that we've identified as being the key components, the things that you really should think through when you are developing or maintaining or growing your school garden program. The first being overall vision and goal. So have you identified goals for your garden, whether that be a new garden or an existing garden? Do you have a vision for your garden? So is that, what's the vision of what's this going to bring to my school or my community? Or, what's the vision of how we can take our garden to the next level? And then the 2 factors we look for within the vision and the goal are clarity and then strength and innovation. The second is need. So this is not to say that everyone's going to have different need, and this could look different for everyone. So it might be the need among your student population, or the need in your community, or it could just be a challenge that faces your community as a whole. It could be high FRPL or a high number of students that are on scholarship. If those don't apply to you, it could be, think in terms of your garden. What would benefit your garden? Would your garden benefit from the people that manage your garden attending some garden trainings? Third, child engagement and curriculum and academic integration is just like it sounds. How engaged can you get the students? How often can you bring them to the garden? How many subjects are involved? Is it just the science, or is there a way for the art class to also use the garden? So community engagement, support from others. This support from others and community engagement, they're one and the same, but they're a little bit different. So, you want to engage the community in the sense that you have support from outside your school, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but then also the support from within your school, the administration. Do you maybe have a garden committee? Do you have a group of teachers that are spearheading this? Really champions for the garden? That would be a good way to look at it. Sustainability, again, so it's easy to think about sustainability in terms of funds, and we will talk about that a little bit more, but to consider sustainability in other elements of the garden. So in terms of, do you have access to and availability of garden tools and water? Do you have a master gardener or another qualified individual available to kind of provide that expertise? Do you have identified success measures? If you have an existing garden, how long has it been around? What does the longevity of your garden speak to? How does it speak to the sustainability of your program? And then other grant support and extended community support. I keep saying that and we'll get there. And then budget. So budgets are going to vary. They're going to be very small, or they're going to be large, or they might differ depending on the project. So it's not so much about the size of the budget as much as it is about, is your budget well thought out? Is your budget viable? Is it well planned? So this is this piece about build partnerships. And I feel like this slide kind of made its way into the wrong place in my presentation, but we'll go here and then we'll come back to the grant writing tips. So I got asked yesterday this question about, how do you have that conversation, or how do you approach these people that you would, want to try and develop this relationship for extended community support. And a handful of things we find that we've learned. A lot of these things that I was sharing, we learn from the grant applications that we've received and from our progress reports. And it really is, say you approach someone in your community, or you're trying to build a relationship with, a local business or a garden club or a master gardener, that you would really benefit from having their involvement. And it's, share your story. So you go to them and whether you have a new garden or you have an existing garden, share your story. So is it how did you get from point A to point B of really wanting to build a garden in your school? Or how did you, get from point A to point B of this is where our garden started and this is where we are now and this is where we want to go. Be upfront about your needs, your capabilities, and your dreams. So when you start that conversation and you share a little bit about your story, being able to tell them very clearly, this is our vision, this is where we want to go, this is what we're capable of, but this is where maybe this relationship comes into play. A lot of times what you'll find is that you can identify relationships that are win-win partnerships. You can both identify goals that work for you as the school with the garden, and then as the organization who might be able to provide us support. And support could be garden labor, it could be garden tools, it doesn't have to be just funds. And then realizing these things don't happen overnight, so allowing those relationships to grow over time. Sometimes those conversations take a little bit of time to have, so just being patient. And then once you've developed them, whether they, turn out to be a relationship or just a conversation that was had, stay in touch. Keep in contact with those people. Share. If you do create a partnership, coming back to them later and closing the loop and saying, kind of giving them an update of what their contribution has had impacted, how they have impacted your garden. Okay, so the garden grant writing tips, which is the meat of this presentation. The Food Corps reviewers developed pretty organically as they have reviewed a lot of these applications, a lot of what they wanted to share, what they wish they could tell the applicant, and not only what they wanted to give as feedback, but kind of what they identified as being super helpful for their own grant writing skills. And they created a document. So we translated this into a grant writing tips document that's on our website as well. So if you lose any of this, then it's always there. But it very much became a kind of a how as rather than a what to write. So how to write it versus what to write. So you've got all of your plans. You've considered, the 6 key components of your garden. You've thought through sustainability, you've thought through the child engagement, you've thought through the extended support. Now you have to sit down and you have to write all of this, translate it into an application for someone you don't know to read. And a lot of times you've got word limits or character counts on these application questions. So the primary themes that came out of the feedback that the Food Corps reviewers had were these 7 things. So be specific, be unique, be concise, be realistic, strategic, sustainable, and passionate. So first, be specific. What does that mean? Focus on numbers, descriptive adjectives, really lay out the plan. Don't really worry about over-explaining, just remember to be concise in doing so. Include things like how many students are going to be involved in the garden, how many times a day, a week, a month, a year will the classes get to come, how many classes are going to be involved in the garden, how many subjects are going to get to use the garden as a teaching tool. It helps to paint a clear and measurable picture for the reviewer. I'm speaking about being specific in terms of child engagement and curriculum integration, but also remember to use this tip when talking about how your funds will be used, how you'll involve the community, how the program will be evaluated, and then also when you're discussing your needs in your application. So we're going to look at an example. Our garden coordinator spends much of her time working with children throughout the school. So what's a really obvious thing that could have been a little bit more specific in here? Just yell it out. Lovely. Awesome. So a good example, each class comes to the farm for 45 minutes, 2 times per month. An even better example, Our garden hosts 50 students each week in 45-minute classes with 2 instructors at each class. This is 3 hours in the garden per student. Produce from the garden is used in a meal in the cafeteria once a month. This is 9 meals a year. So you can see how they included specific numbers and all relevant information. The second, I won't read it to you, but it talks about improvements that they can make or that they've envisioned for their garden, and it identifies these improvements, and then it also uses numbers and specific details to include like measures of success. So the next one, be unique. Every school is different, but the key here is to focus on what makes your school unique and to incorporate how that's going to be shown through your garden. Don't be afraid to share the character of your school in your application. Let that shine through. And then a lot of times for garden coordinators or people that are in charge of the garden or writing these grants, they're writing the grants for multiple schools. So if you fall into that category and you are writing multiple grants, don't submit one with like a blanket grant with all of the same answers. Definitely tailor it as best you can to each school. What the reviewers see then is that if you submit one and all the answers are the same, they view it as a scripted application versus a viable one. So be concise. It can be really tempting to add a lot of narrative to your questions or to the question answers, especially when you're super excited and you have lots of ideas and things that you want to share and things that you really want to convey to the reviewers. But only do it when it's relevant. A lot of times the reviewers, they're so focused and they want to know on your plan. They don't necessarily want to know how you got there, how you feel about it. So things like using not full sentences is oftentimes okay, or finding a good way to use bullet points to just kind of very clearly and concisely convey that. So we're going to look at an example that might help. So we do have tools to garden, but we definitely need a safe place to store them. Without a shed, we lose our tools. With that grant, we can buy one, so we do not do that. Please help us have more time in the garden and less time looking for our tools. A better example, we build a shed to store our tools. This will keep us organized, focused on gardening, and help us maintain our tools for years to come. To build this shed, we're receiving support from our community partners. And then they use bullet points very nicely to convey exactly what they're trying to say. Focus on what's important. Definitely don't be afraid of that bullet point. A lot of times for the reviewers, they're reviewing a lot of these too, so it kind of just helps to get the message across. So be realistic. Most reviewers are subject matter experts, so they know exactly what is needed for a garden to thrive. They know exactly what is realistic as well, so they want to see realistic plans. They see them as more likely to succeed. Within this, don't be afraid to share how your garden has grown and what you've learned. How you have maybe made mistakes in the past and learned from them and then tried something new is also great info. And then also keeping in mind, big is great, but it's not always better. So the reviewer wants to know that you're doing what you're doing and you can do it well versus doing everything. A lot of times at work, we talk about this in terms of right size. So when we're talking about goals and priorities and things, we want to know and want to feel like they're right sized for us and what we're capable of doing. So be strategic. Pay attention to your audience. Understand the organization's mission. A lot of places offer grant opportunities for this kind of work, but they all have individual missions. So it's important that you are able to kind of recognize that, see how the garden grant fits into it, and speak to it as best you can. If for example, our mission has a high nutrition focus. So our mission is to improve children's nutrition. So gardens that are used as a tool to do this really speak to us. All right, be sustainable. So here we go. This term I've used a handful of times and in a lot of different ways. A lot of the things that we identify as key components of the garden program kind of contribute to the sustainability of your program. So, having that community involvement, having a well thought out budget, those things contribute to sustainability, but then we also identify sustainability as being a key component. So you want to, communicate all of this, communicate that it's been thought through in a handful of ways in your application. Understand that any type of support is a type of support, and, money saved, so in terms of labor or expertise or tools or funds, advertisements, any of it. Share with us that even if you have applied for other grants in the past and you haven't received them, that's okay. Share that with us, because what it says is that you're willing and have kind of thought through this process of looking elsewhere. $2,000 for our grant program, we recognize it's enough to start a garden maybe, but it's not really enough to sustain your garden over time. So, being aware of that, we recognize that if this hasn't really been thought through yet, then, maybe the school isn't quite ready to have the garden. So an example, Whole Kids Foundation is the only grant we plan to apply for. We have the support of our PTA. A good example, we have received materials from our local Home Depot and gardening store. An even better example, we have received materials from our local Home Depot and gardening store. We applied for a Home Depot school garden grant but did not get it. We plan to reapply this year into the Annie's gardening grant. We're also ramping up our school garden events as a way to garner awareness of our school garden and possibly generate more funds. So you see what they did here. They identified that they created a relationship with a local business. They shared that they'd been applying for other grants, or that they had a plan to apply for an additional grant. And then also this idea of events to create awareness in their community as another potential way to raise funds. And finally, don't be afraid to show why you and your school and your community are taking this on. So be passionate. Let that excitement shine through your application as best you can. You'd be surprised. One of the things we do is we review progress reports that we receive from our grant recipients about 1 year from when they receive the grant. And I'm always amazed at when I sit down to read some of these, how it's so clear the excitement that people have to share about their garden and their plans or what they've done. And I'm just reading, I'm reading this on a computer screen. So it can be done to share that excitement and convey it, even if we're not together and not being able to listen in person. Okay, so like I said, our grant is a $2,000 monetary grant. We know that this does not fulfill the life of your garden. It only, maybe helps to make one improvement or to get you started. So one of the things that we have available on our website is a list of other grant opportunities that will support this kind of work. Anything from Annie's was on here. The American Heart Association has a teaching garden grant. So our website is chock full of resources and things like this that you can use. We also have a gardening app. It was developed with the Center for Eco-Literacy. Focuses on teaching kids the core tenets of what organic food is, but it starts by teaching them about organic soil. It's accessible on desktops and tablets, just I think through the Apple Store. Some other online resources. So there is a summarized kind of what I've shared in terms of the grant writing tips on our website. Developed by the Food Corps, and we translated it into a document that's always available there. In addition, we have an elementary school garden curriculum developed with the American Heart Association. And then if any of you are venturing into the world of taking some of the produce from your garden into your school cafeteria, we do have a program, the Garden to Cafeteria Toolkit, that kind of speaks to protocols in order to do that. Because every school district has, is a little bit different. Okay, I was so worried about getting through this, and it looks like I have plenty of time, a few minutes extra. So does anyone have any questions?
What did you say for being strategic?
Being strategic, yeah. So speak to your audience. So know your organization's mission. And the example I used was if you're applying for a Whole Kids Foundation grant, our mission is very nutrition focused. We like to see that the garden is being used to improve children's nutrition. So, and that's not the same for every organization. So, for us, when we see gardens that are doing that, they speak to us.
You usually receive our grant, select 600 per year.
Mm-hmm.
How many come in?
Between 900 and 1,000 every year.
So more than half are being funded.
Yeah, and then. Yeah, and the extras that don't get selected in the first round, they don't go away. We keep an on-hold list, so there oftentimes become opportunities for us to fund from our on-hold list.
And is this all over the United States?
Yep, all over the U.S. and Canada, parts of Canada.
How many are here in Nevada?
I'm gonna test my knowledge. I don't know the hard number for Nevada, but that's actually you bring up a great point. So someone had asked me yesterday about, how do you develop these relationships, and one of the things that came to mind that we often encourage people to do is, if you already have a garden or you're interested in having a garden, are there other schools in your community that do have a garden that maybe you could connect with? And we have a recipient database on our website. Most of you, it sounds like there's only some people from out of state of Nevada, but regardless, we have a recipient database. You can search by state or program to see what other schools in your community have received a garden grant, and it serves as a good place. Maybe someone in these schools and you can kind of talk to them and bounce ideas. And something we're really working to do that we think would be super beneficial is to kind of facilitate and going forward in the future, promote this connection between people who are doing the work like you all are doing, because it would be super helpful.
Do you ever give grants to pre-K?
We don't have a pre-K program right now. So the caveat being that as long as you engage kids in the K through 12 age range, you're eligible. So if you have pre-K and kindergarten, you can apply. If it's just pre-K, then you are not eligible. We're working on that, though. My colleague is super passionate about pre-K having the opportunity as well.
What's the percentage of schools being accepted that do not have a school garden, so they need the money to help start up?
That's a great question. I'd say there's probably maybe half. We also do award nonprofit organizations. So typically when we choose, we do 500 schools and 100 nonprofit organizations. So of that 500, they're all the same, though. The nonprofits can have new gardens as well. So I'd say about half.
We've gotten the grant before. Is there a time limit where we're allowed to apply again, or are we allowed to actually apply every year?
So we haven't, the renewal grant program will be rolling out this year, hopefully. And as long as you weren't like a recipient last year, then come to us. I think the way we're going to do the renewal is that there has to be like a period of time in between. It's not going to be a repeat every year. I'd probably say one grant cycle, so about a year. So say you received the grant or you applied for the grant in 2017, you couldn't apply again in the 2018 one, you'd have to wait till the 2019 one. You can find us at wholekidsfoundation.org, or if you email, you have specific questions, you're looking at our website, you're interested in our grant program, email this grants@wholekidsfoundation.org. I manage this inbox, so you'll probably get me or one of our awesome interns on the other end. More than happy to answer any questions you have. I will also share that if you are interested in the application, you don't have to wait till September to see the questions. You can reach out to us and we make the application accessible so that you have a little bit of time to prepare so that you're not like rushing at September 1st, and that's a busy time for schools because the school year is sometimes often starting. So you can also find that by contacting us as well. Thank you.